Here in Auschwitz, and I think around the world, an experience that is speaking about the humanity of the victims. Because if Auschwitz was an incredible destruction for all the physical aspects of the human person, it was also an incredible destruction at the psychological level, and also for many of them at a spiritual level. And this is a topic that never was presented here in any exhibition, in any way. And I would like to thank particularly all the people that were involved in the preparatives of this exhibition. Of course, Karin Glander, of course, Eli Kleinman, of course, Daniel Libskind, everybody who was really involved in this incredible exhibition that will be presented here in a very important moment in starting of the next year. The 27th January, we'll have the 75th anniversary of the liberation. That will be a very big anniversary with, I hope, many delegations from all around the world. And today, we have the 75th anniversary of 1944, the most destructive moment in the history of the camp, with, in particular, the transport from Romania, transports from the ending ghetto of Lodz, transport from the Warsaw in the uprising, and from many other places of the still occupied at that time by Germany, Europe. So I hope that our visitors will have the time and the opportunity to see those faces, to look to those eyes, and to read those words of testimony, and to think also not only about the physical destruction, but also about all the human, psychological, and spiritual problems that this extreme experience of Auschwitz led to them until the end of their life many times. Thank you, thank you.
Piotr, thank you, and Andrzej, thank you for, this has been a long road to get this here, and I thank you for allowing us to do that. Leonard Cohen wrote, "There is a crack in everything. That is how the light gets in. That is how the light gets in." This exhibition is us exploring and honoring and trying to show the light. We all know the stories of the destruction. You've all been through a very, very tough day. But this is to highlight the resilience, the hope, the light. Avram Seltzer, I came to your house. Susie was there. Libu, I didn't meet you then. In a minute, I understood how beautiful, how happy, how you spoke about your wife in such a loving, gorgeous way. And you moved me so much. And you're part of this light, and we're honoring you and celebrating you today. And I cannot thank you for being here, but it must be so difficult on one hand. But you're sitting here, a free man, and we all applaud that. And Peter, I came to Munich to meet you. Peter is a Sinti. It took us a very, very long time, 2 years to find Peter. Peter was 4 years old when he was in Auschwitz. And we had a really nice translated discussion, and then he shared many stories that he was told. He had the beautiful feeling of being in his mother's lap and safe, and he was full of love. And Peter, thank you for coming from Germany. I want to also talk about me as a young girl learning about the Holocaust, and me now as not a young girl, but looking at it in the eyes of a mother and a grandmother, because you really have no idea, except when you're walking your grandchild across the street and you're holding their hand, or you won't even allow them to cross the street in New York or whatever city you live in, and to think that they could be plucked away screaming, it's a different understanding and feeling of it, or your child. And every one of these people who are here, and I'm going to give a few minutes just to honor each one, and a little tidbit, because I think we could take the minute for each one. Avram Seltzer had his lucky, maybe down from God. He had faith. He came in from a very religious, beautiful family, and he knew he wasn't going to make it until one day somebody said, "Does anybody here know about horses?" And he knew nothing about horses and raised his hand. And because he was working in the stables and he used the manure of the horse to keep his feet warm and to steal an apple or a carrot from the horse, he survived. And that was a thing that gave him hope and gave him faith. When this project started, Henry tapped me on the shoulder, and I won't... Henry has been studying this for 10 years. You'll hear from him, and I don't want to repeat, but he is brilliant and sensitive and knowledgeable, and he asked me, I don't know why, but he asked me to go along with him on this journey. And we started photographing, And on the journey, I kept saying every day, how are we going to show this? How are we going to show this? And for a year, I kept photographing, we kept interviewing, and then it was suggested to us that you actually don't need an exhibition designer, you need an architect. And of course, Daniel's name came up, and we sat down with him, and he said, what's the problem? And I said, they want us to put it on the road there. People are going to walk by it. They're not going to stop. It's going to be disregarded. It needs to be, something really, stunning physically, but also, causing you to just pause and reflect. And he said, give me 6 weeks. And Daniel, you're going to probably speak a little bit about it too, but for me to have that experience where I came back the next time, 6 weeks to the dot, you didn't just have a little sketch, you had a model, you had a film on it, you interpreted everything. There's not one inch or bolt in this exhibition that isn't thought through the railroad-like form, through the stripe, like a striped pajama, like the stripe of the tefillin. How do you engage in each person and not fly by them? Well, he forces you to look at the words first, to read, get to know them, and then open them up and discover them. And then my choice of the way I decided to photograph them, to photograph all of the people that I met, was I wanted to show and convey their beauty, their love of life, and how they took what their experiences was, not to be steeped in anger, not to be steeped in revenge, but to show love. Every house I went to, I walked out of there, they were loving, they were resilient, they were hopeful, and I always asked at the end of each interview, what message? And most of the time it was, be kind. So Broinia Brandman was 12 years old, gutsy little girl, and very religious background. She wanted to, she was scared. She saw her sisters and her name on the list, and she ran up to Mengele and said, you have to take my name off and my sister's name off. And for her, all of a sudden there was an air raid, and he said, because she knew that could have gotten her killed. Anyway, the air raid came at that very moment. That was her miracle. She called it for me her miracle. It doesn't matter. It just held her on. And he took her name off the list, and then he fled. Joe Bitstris, who I had no idea was a Holocaust survivor and was my father's best friend, and they played cards together. I came there. He survived because he put tefillin on. He found tefillin, and he put tefillin on, and he was able to go into a trance, and he was able to picture warmth and flowers and women with children and strolling. Leah Fiedler, I went to Israel, to the West Bank, to meet her. She was 16 years old. She was in the same lager as a very famous Czechoslovakian gynecologist named Giselle Pearl, who ended up being a gynecologist in New York at Mount Sinai. And they discovered quickly on that if Mengele noticed you were pregnant, he'd start doing experiments. So at 16 years old, with her mother and the doctor, they performed abortions. Now, at the peril of their own life, but also halachically, they had issues for themselves, and all these layers and layers for religious people of how to behave and how to do. And she described that, but she felt that her not being discovered and saving all those women was her contribution and a miracle that she survived. Rumi Gell prayed, was a very cheder. He prayed without any siddur, and when they would walk on these marches and long hours, they would do Talmud by heart, and everybody would share what they knew, so that his education of the Talmud continued while he was there. I went up to West Hartford to meet him and his wife. I've never seen such a wonderful, happy, joyous man. Rabbi Grinwald was 14 years old. He was tall. Mengele didn't realize he was so young, and he was very, very smart, ahead of everyone in his cheder. And he heard the shofar being blowed. One day somebody snuck in a shofar, and it gave him the incredible strength to continue. Baruch Gross was 15 years old. He unfortunately he passed away. I came to him immediately when I was told he wasn't feeling well. He was surrounded by, he was as sharp as a tack, and he was surrounded by his family, and they were just holding him and touching him, and you'll see in the photograph, his face is luminous. When he came to the camp, he thought everybody was divided. You know, the men were going here, the women were going there. He thought it was about like going to daven, mincha marav, until he realized what the selection was. Sarah Kestenbaum was 13. You can see in the picture she's a very large woman. So she said she was 16. And I met her in the pool in Miami Beach. She was swimming with my mother. And I started talking about the project, and she said, I was in Auschwitz. I went back to talk to her and meet with her, and also I have to say that many, many times after these people would be interviewed by Henry and speak to me, they would call me up and say, you know, that was so cathartic. Sarah Kestenbaum was one of those people. She called me later on to tell me that. And when I asked her, she just said, faith is hope. Ethel Kleinman was so beautiful, and I had such a great interview, and Ellie will talk about his mother. Are you going to talk about how she threw the scraps of food to get the Haggadah? Okay. Itty Landau, so gorgeous. She was about to give up. She was wasting away, and she thought her mother was gone, her whole family was gone, they were separated. And one day, when it was just about, she knew that she was going to put herself on those electric fences, she heard a new group of women coming down her lager, and somebody yelled, anybody from Debrecen here? And she recognized her sister's voice, and she screamed out, it's me. And she said, Mommy's here too. And then her whole entire attitude, she wanted to live, and somebody with great kindness switched the place of her bunker or bunk bed so she could be in the different lager with her mother. And that's how she survived with her mother and her sister. Rabbi Nissim Mengel, his father always taught him fire could make things hard or they could make things melt. And his last words to him were, use the fire to get hardened like, I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, you take an egg and you cook it, it becomes hard. You take steel and you put fire on it, it melts. You know, be like the egg and have the faith. Esther Peterseil, she would be here today. Her grandson's getting married in 2 days. She goes around speaking. She's 94 years old. She is, when she was separated from her mother just said to her, remember who you are, build a Jewish home. And that's what she did. Irving Roth, when I asked him about his relationship with faith, he said, I have no problem with God. I have a problem with man. Chaya Rubin, she sang this song to me in Yiddish. She felt her miracle was happening all the time. They sang the song every night, and she didn't get a fever of typhoid till the end on the death march, freezing. Everybody went to hide in a barn, and all of a sudden her fever spiked to 105. And her sister and her aunt were with her, and they huddled close to her, and her warmth gave them heat, and all the other girls, unfortunately, were frozen in the morning, and those three walked out. She believes that was a miracle. Ruth Solomon, faith is hope. And she went with her sister, and every day they said the Shema at night, and it gave them hope. Wherever she was, she never let her sister out of her side. And sometimes when her sister was giving up, she would give her strength, and then the other way around. Yitzchak Baruch Schachter, he used to daven in the bed. One would roll over. All 8 would have to roll over at the next time. He has 90 great-grandchildren and 9 great-great-grandchildren. And I did the math, counting up all the offspring of everybody. And the other night, from these 21 people, there's now 1,052 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Julius Mayer Tauber, he pounded on the table when I talked to him, and he said, people just need to be kind. We have Helena Nowinska, who I came to Poland to photograph. She was 102 years old. She passed away. She survived Auschwitz because of her being a musician. She was a violinist, and today you'll hear more about the music importance in Auschwitz. She is the one behind the yellow background. She was beautiful and elegant, and it was a real inspiration to meet her, a Catholic Pole. And Sophia Pazmits would have been here today. She's a little fragile. I went to see her in Warsaw. She came with her mother. Her mother didn't last 3 weeks. And then she's a Polish, Catholic Polish woman who was luckily, or she feels faith came, God came. She went to work in the kitchen where she could steal or pick up from the floor extra scraps. Somebody gave her a medallion of Jesus Christ. You'll see in the photograph, she's holding the medallion. She didn't let it go out of her hand. If she was naked, she put it in her mouth. If she was in sleep, she put it in her bed. She put it in a crack in her bed or in the bottom of her shoe when she was marching. And Peter I spoke about. I'll just close with one touching story that's about Magda Waller. I went to Toronto to meet Magda, and she told me this, that she was in the camp. She had just gotten there, and she didn't know the system. And the system was you had a pot of soup, and they lined you up 5 behind it, and you had a spoon, and you took 1 spoon, and then you went to the back, and you took another spoon, and you went to the back. You couldn't take a sip because you might take a bigger gulp, so everybody had to have a spoon. Magda Waller just got there. She didn't have a spoon. She saw this beautiful young girl walked up to her and said, somebody in my lager just died. I have her spoon. If you give me a little extra bread, I will give you the spoon. So Magda said, sure, I'll give you the spoon. But in her heart, she thought, all right, I'll just be kind and give it to her. The woman was so beautiful and so fragile and so frail. So she gave her the bread and thought that would be that. And she wouldn't have a spoon anyway, and she wouldn't have the bread. And then later on, and she didn't know where she was or where she was sleeping or what lager she was in. She came back a few minutes later, and she said, here's the spoon, and then she disappeared. And she was on her mind the whole entire time that she was in the camp. Her beauty, her kindness, because she understood that under these terrible situations, you do things just to survive, and they're not always so kind. So it was on her mind. It was haunting. She survives the camp. She meets a young boy in the DP camp. He comes to visit her. Joint distribution puts her up in a home, gives her a dress. And she meets this young man who every day brings her a little something. And he was so kind and so nice. His name was Yossi. She really grew to depend on his visit. She was alone. She lost her whole family. And one night, one of his friends came and said, I'm sorry, he can't come tonight. He's going to pick his sister up at the train station. She knocked on the door. He knocked on the door the next day with the girl with the spoon.
Good evening. I'll keep it short because you can't see it, but I can see the lightning just behind you. My name is Ashland Weinstein. I'm a third-generation violin maker from Tel Aviv, Israel. I was asked a few months ago by Kirill to be here with some of the instruments that we have in our collection of violins of hope. The collection is made of today about 75 instruments. Some of them survived camps together with their owners. Some of the owners unfortunately died during the war. You'll hear two of the violins today here. One belonged to Fanny Hecht. Fanny Hecht, her husband and two kids, were about to be deported from Holland to Auschwitz. And the day before they were supposed to be deported, she went to one of her neighbors and she told her, she said, "Please, this is the most valuable thing I have in my life. Keep it for me. If I ever come back, I'll take it." Unfortunately, Fanny Hecht, her husband, and two kids all died in Auschwitz. The other violin that you'll be hearing tonight was made by one of the first Jewish violin makers, Jacob Hackert, who had a workshop in Holland. And when he decided to try and run away from the Nazis, he was caught very close to the Swiss border. He was sent to Auschwitz and he was killed on the 20th of May, 1944. Music was and still is a very big part of Jewish life. You can hear it. We know all about the klezmers and, of course, all about the great Jewish musicians. Music was a big part also in all the camps. Every camp would have an orchestra. You'll hear tonight Raphael Wallfisch playing the cello. His mother, Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, survived Auschwitz. She played in the orchestra of Alma Rose. She knew one of the people that you made photos of. It was a very good friend of hers, the violinist, the Polish violinist. Raphael just told it to me a second ago. I asked him, "Did you know her?" He said, "Yeah, she was a very good friend of my mother." So it's a very small world. And what we try to do with the project Violins of Hope is we tour all around the world. We do concerts, exhibitions. But the main thing that we do is we talk to the kids. Just this year, I spoke to about 40,000 students in Phoenix and Knoxville areas. There are many more scheduled for the next years, and we have to make sure to do one thing. We have to make sure that they know about it, and we have to make sure they understand that this should never happen. Raphael is going to play a short solo piece by Bach. The second piece that you'll hear is by Raphael, with Raphael and Jihat Ashkin playing on the violin, made by Jacob Hackert. It's a piece by Ernst Bloch, who was basically the first Jewish composer to take Jewish prayers and Jewish songs and melodies and bring them into music. The third piece that you'll hear is the Bach double violin concerto played by Jihat, my wife Seville, and Raphael Wallfisch in honor of Alma Rose, who was at the head of the women orchestra in Birkenau. Although she managed to save all the women who played for her, she unfortunately died few months before the liberation, and the only recording we have of her is her playing the double Bach violin with her father before the war. The last piece, many of you will recognize, many of you will probably sing. It's the composition on Avinu Malkeinu by Jihat Ashkin. So I will not go further. Please welcome Raphael Wallfisch. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed.
I must say it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be here. In the sight of this space of destruction, and also on an exhibit that speaks about life. Let me just say, firstly, a few appreciations. I would like to thank the museum I work for, the Amoreish Memorial Museum, for allowing me to be able to do this work with Carol and with Daniel. I particularly want to thank Eli Kleiman, the founder and the president, Rabbi Shalom Friedman, the director and CEO, and Rabbi Bleich, our continued support individual in the program, the chief rabbi of Ukraine. One of the things I think that we really understand is that this exhibit is about faith and resiliency. And when I first started thinking about this exhibit, Carol mentioned, I spoke with Carol Englander, and I was taken by some of her previous work. Her previous work was on Jewish poverty in New York. And as soon as I saw Carol's commitment to this project, I began to realize that she was able to take sorrow and suffering and resiliency and courage and capture it in the photo. And I was so taken by that masterful ability to make the photo read in a particular way. I also want to thank Daniel Libskind, whose mastery of design has created a kind of aperture from which to enter into the complexity of the stories that Carol and I sourced over the past 3 years. So I thank them. I thank them all. I also want to say a couple of things just in terms of some other people who were involved in this. I want to thank Johan van Lierop and Stefan Blach of Libskind Studios, and I also want to thank the Ancora, the Vibes, and the Grand Company who actually built this thing, and it is an amazing piece of Polish construction at its very, very best, I have to say. I'm very proud of what they did. This site is of particular significance to me, and in a sense, it's a re-entry into my family's past. My parents were Polish Jews. My mother, Sala Lustiger, came from Będzin, not very far from here, about 50-odd kilometers. The Jews that were not killed in Będzin, in the streets of Będzin or in the Grand Synagogue, were brought here to Auschwitz and murdered. My father is from, or was from Tarnów. Again, not very far from here, but 154 kilometers. And the Jews that were not murdered in Tarnów, the streets of Tarnów, in the Great Square, were deported to Belzec, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Krakow-Plaszow. I remember one of my earliest memories of my mother speaking about her faith, but always described in the sense of her belief in the Oibishten, in Yiddish, in English, the one above, and this kind of commingling between her faith and the everyday horror of Auschwitz, for something that she could not wake up from and perhaps would not wake up from. So faith became for me a kind of indicator of humanity. And I'm not speaking here about, and I think we should be really clear, I'm not speaking about spiritual resistance created as a kind of counterpoint to the physical resistance of the armed resistance of the Warsaw Ghetto. But spiritual resistance is it's a writer's and it's a curator's terminology. In over 10 years of interviewing, and I've interviewed hundreds of survivors in many different organizations, I've never heard anyone speak about spiritual resistance. What I have heard of is I've heard of thoughts, practices, and comportments that can be best understood through the concept of faith, a culture of faith that walked into this camp. Think of, to just perhaps send this point home a little stronger, I'm sure you've all read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. But Viktor Frankl really organized those thoughts on an individual level. Think of faith from a Frankl perspective, but on a collective level. It brought collective meaning to the experience of having something to believe in, which for me, I can't think of anything that is more important. Now, this antinomy, this kind of opposition always interested me. And I would say that the exhibit, therefore, and the core element of this exhibit is Carol's photographs, the language, this complex language of the photograph, and the text. And the text is 200 words, more or less, for every text. And I should say that the very beginning of the text is curated. I brought it from maybe hour 3. Always starts with the age. I was 4 years old. I was 8 years old. I was 14 years old. This repetition is, I think, a trope, a metaphor for an experience. And I think it's really important also for young people to look at the ages of these aged people when they walked into this hellhole. So hence there is a textual understanding here that I really want you to, when you view the exhibit, to think about, of this kind of intermingling of photograph and text, creating a third emotional space from which to understand meaning. Meaning about the sayable, the seeable, discourse about, and the experience of. And lastly, I just want to say, one of the things that, as someone who thinks about Holocaust a lot, just ask my daughter, and the thing that keeps me up at night is the precariousness and the uncertainty of historical transmission as history morphs into fragments of memory, which is, I think, we need to have more artistic approaches to the experience of the Holocaust. I'm not saying the history of the Holocaust, but the experience of the Holocaust. And so survivor testimony is their legacy, but it needs to be applied in innovative ways, which we hope we have done. When I was working at Yale University at the Fortunoff Holocaust Testimony Archives, a mentor of mine, a very important person to me, Jeffrey Hartman, once, the scholar Jeffrey Hartman, once told me that listening to testimony is about reading the wound, not sealing the wound. And my sense of this is that the victim, the prisoner, is a form of sealing the wound. So we need to do, and we need to create a paradigm shift. And I think Piotr Szydzynski suggested that we're looking at something different. And the paradigm shift we have to create is to leave the notion of the victim and understand that's only part of the story. The notion of the prisoner, it's a part of the story, but we need another part of the story, which is their internal life. So instead of victim, I would like to refer to these 21 and all the survivors that I have interviewed over the years as our greatest generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's as I stand here, I think of growing up here in Poland with my father counting about 90 people of his immediate family and my mother's who perished, most of them in Auschwitz, some in Treblinka, but most of them here. And I think of how lucky I was to think about what Carol and Henry came with, the idea of faith, because I never thought about it, never, until I thought of the only two survivors of one survivor of my father's family, large family, only sister, Ruzha, survived Auschwitz, was religious before, and remained deeply religious after. And so my mother's only brother who survived Auschwitz, Nehemiah, who went to Palestine later after being released, also was a Hasidic Jew who remained Hasidic and transmitted it to his family in Bnei Brak till today. So it was a topic that really glowed. And I thought, what can one do to communicate these amazing stories and the amazing eyes of these elderly men and women to bring a future to this place which had no future? How did this future happen? What kind of light is there in this world? How can one communicate through an image and a pithy story something that is so important, not just for their survival, but for ours? And so that's really the installation. I wanted to read you, if you don't mind, first in the original, in Polish, and second in English, a poem by one of my favorite writers, Wisława Szymborska, one of the great Polish poets. Wszelki wypadek. Zdarzyć się mogło. Zdarzyć się musiało. Zdarzyło się wcześniej, później, bliżej, dalej. Zdarzyło się nie tobie. Ocalałeś, bo byłeś pierwszy. Ocalałeś, bo byłeś ostatni. Bo sam, bo ludzie, bo w lewo, bo w prawo, bo padał deszcz, bo padał cień, bo panowała słoneczna pogoda. Na szczęście był tam las. Na szczęście nie było drzew. Na szczęście szyna, hak, belka, hamulec, framuga, zakręt, milimetr, sekunda. Na szczęście brzytwa pływała po wodzie. Wskutek, ponieważ, a jednak, pomimo, co by to było, gdyby ręka, noga, o krok, o włos od zbiegu okoliczności. Więc jesteś? Prosto z uchylonej jeszcze chwili? Sieć była jedna oka, a ty przez to oko? Nie umiem się nadziwić, namilczeć się temu. Posłuchaj, jak mi prędko bije twoje serce. And in English translation, there but for the grace. It could have happened. It had to happen. It happened sooner, later, nearer, farther. It happened not to you. You survived because you were the first. You survived because you were the last. Because you were alone. Because of people. Because you turned left. Because you turned right. Because rain fell. Because a shadow fell. Because sunny weather prevailed. Luckily, there was a wood. Luckily, there were no trees. Luckily, there was a rail, a hook, a beam, a break, a frame, a bend, a millimeter, a second. Luckily, a straw was floating on the surface. Thanks to, because, and yet, in spite of, what would have happened had not a hand, a foot, by a step, a hairbreadth, by sheer coincidence. So you're here, straight from the moment still ajar. The net had only one eye hole, and you got through it. There is no end to my wonder, my silence. Listen how fast your heart beats in me. Thank you.
Darkness and light. It's the night of the holiday of Shavuos, also known as the Feast of Weeks. The train of cattle cars speeding through the days and nights has finally arrived at Auschwitz. My mother, she should live and be well, has just turned 20 years old, the youngest of 12 children, jammed in a cattle car, along with her parents, siblings, and their spouses, nieces and nephews, and Jewish neighbors from Budrug Kerestor and surrounding towns in Hungary. They have been plucked from the ghettos and gathered to be brought here to what would be their final destination. A night of death? Yes, but also a night of miracles. For Ethel Kleinman and some others, that night was the first of many miracles that happened in this dark death world. The infamous Dr. Mengele, the angel of death, is pointing to the right for life and to the left for death as soon as the new arrivals move past him in a line directly from the train. This was the first of numerous selections from which this emaciated, weak girl somehow miraculously moved onto the line to the right for work after being selected to go left to the gas chamber. The winter of 1944 started early in Poland and was the coldest winter on record since the start of the 20th century. Every morning, the prisoners would have to line up and be counted, sometimes for hours. My mother told me that all she was wearing was a thin cotton dress and no shoes. All she had was cardboard wrapped around her feet. How did she or anyone survive? They pleaded to God to get them through this hell. I'm not here to preach religion, but whether religious or not, these survivors, they found faith, hope, and determination that led to resiliency. That precious, dwindling generation of survivors went on to rebuild their lives and families and a Jewish society all around the world from scratch, coming out of darkness with nothing but their ragged prisoner uniforms. This, too, is an incredible miracle. I was 6 years old, and I vividly remember a Sabbath afternoon laying down on my living room floor and looking through a book with horrific pictures of the victims and survivors. I had never seen a dead body before and didn't understand what the piles of bodies of human skeletons were. I asked my parents, what was this? And they simply told me that it's the Holocaust and we will explain when you get a little older. That was how it started for me. I lost all 4 grandparents here in Auschwitz, but at least I have the stories I was told about them and dreams of what they may have looked like. Education and remembrance has to be taught to the current and future generations of children to prevent history from repeating itself, especially the way anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head again so openly in today's world. They must know what happened and be taught that the Holocaust did not discriminate. Man, woman, child, religious, atheist, half-Jewish, Ashkenazic, or Sephardic. The victims, those that perished and those that survived, all united by one fact, by one word, by one identification, Jew. And many people of other faiths in this exhibit also suffer the agony of this darkness. Each and every one of us has a connection to the Holocaust, whether a parent, grandparent, or an uncle or aunt. Someone in our extended family went through it. We cannot forget them. And now just some brief thank yous. First of all, everybody, thank you for coming to this extraordinary event. Carol Englander, you not only have a remarkable eye, you have a remarkable soul. To capture the essence of the survivors in these magnificent photographs takes more than just a special talent. It takes a special person with special insight, and you have achieved that in this exhibit. The photograph you took of my mother for this exhibit is one of the most beautiful photographs of her ever taken. Thank you. Daniel Libskind's incredible world-class design takes us through the path of darkness to light, and what he created comes from his heart and his connection to the Holocaust. Rabbi Shalom Friedman, Rabbi Yaakov Bleich, and the whole Amud Eish team worked extremely hard to coordinate everything and make this exhibit come to life. Thank you. Dr. Piotr Savinsky, director of Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, and Andrzej Kokorczak, the assistant, the deputy director, thank you for helping to facilitate the exhibit and for hosting it. Last and certainly not least, Henry. This is your baby. You conceived it, and you brought it to fruition. God knows you made me and others crazy for months, Henry, but we all got it done thanks to you and your vision. Finally, as we stand here this evening, in this place that represents the epitome of death, we celebrate life, we celebrate faith, and we celebrate resilience through the lens of faith. Me'afela liora. We celebrate the lesson that even in the darkest moments of life, there are miracles and faith to get you through and turn that darkness into light. Thank you.
I'm not supposed to speak. I'm just saying thank you very much, and it's about to rain, so everyone can get to their transportation. I just want to repeat that we're having a dinner tonight for all the guests that came for the opening of the event at the Sheraton Grand at 9 o'clock. Reception at 9:30 will be the dinner. And those that want to stay, there'll be one more piece here for the Bach. Keep your umbrellas handy.